We all know the Game Boy was a blast, even without blast processing. It had amazing games, great controls, and no regional lockout. But let's be honest, it also came with some pretty annoying quirks. So in this video, I'm taking a look at 5 of my so-called favorites, the things we all hated about the original Game Boy. Hunting for the nearest lamp. This is just for illustration, since I couldn't get a Game Boy powered on, so use your imagination. Anyway, we all know the Game Boy didn't have a backlight, but playing in direct sunlight wasn't really an option either, because the screen would just turn into a mirror. So you'd go indoors, which sounds reasonable, right? Except it wasn't. Because even inside, you still needed a proper light source, like a lamp above your bed or a standing lamp next to the couch. Then we all turned to third-party solutions, which didn't really solve anything. They cast ugly shadows, made long sessions tiring, and of course, required even more batteries. Because why not? The Deja Vu games. While some companies went the extra mile and created unique Game Boy titles like Mega Man 5, others just ported their existing games without adding anything new. One example that comes to mind is the Adventue Island series. In fact, the first 3 Adventue Island games are so similar that Hudson Soft decided to port Adventue Island 2 and simply call it Adventue Island, so no one would ask where number 1 went. They also renamed Adventue Island 3 from the NES as Adventue Island 2, if you're wondering. Too bad we never got the Japan-only Adventue Island 4 as 3, because that one actually tried something new. It's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of players were probably happy just playing their favorite games on the go. It's just that sometimes you couldn't help but feel like it was a bit of a cash grab. The lazy ports. I know I just said that ports could be kind of boring, but when we moved to the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, the effort companies put into creating simpler versions of their big hits was actually pretty impressive. But then there were ports that really make you wonder how anyone at Nintendo approved them in the first place. One of the most infamous examples is Aladdin. Not the Capcom version, but the classic one from the Sega Genesis. This footage is from the Disney collection, because at first I thought maybe it was just hard to emulate, and to be fair, Digital Eclipse usually does a pretty good job, maybe except for that last Mortal Kombat collection. What you're looking at here is basically the actual gameplay. It's more like a slideshow than a game. Even some bootleg NES versions are better than this, and those come with their own problems like missing animations and that awful music. And here's a bit of trivia. A few years later, the game was also released on the Game Boy Color by a different developer, Crawfish Interactive. It's a bit smoother, but the Game Boy Color was capable of so much more. The not-so-stereo effect. You could actually do amazing things with the original Game Boy sound hardware. In the right hands, it could even sound a bit like an Amiga. The problem was, you couldn't really get any of that out of the tiny speaker on the original Game Boy. And it was even worse on the Pocket and the Color, which had even smaller speakers. And keep in mind, back then you couldn't just go online and buy ready-made mods to fix all this. Maybe with the exception of things like the newbie Game Boy amplifier, which basically turned your Game Boy into a real brick. And yes, you guessed it, it needed more batteries. A 9-volt one to be exact. You know, the kind you usually find in smoke detectors. So after all that, if you actually wanted that stereo sound, you needed headphones. If what you see online is to be believed, there were official headphones in Japan and other parts of the world. But personally, I'd still go with a nice pair of headphones with soft cushions, something that doesn't leave your ears warm and sweaty on a hot summer day. The link cable headache. At first, I wanted to talk about the relatively small number of games that support the link cable. But then I realized something. Most of the lists you find on fandom sites and wikis aren't really up to date. The most complete list I could find was from Dragonhawk Gaming, and apparently there are no fewer than 150 compatible games. I definitely recommend checking out that video. But there's another issue with the link cable that's hard to ignore. The lack of compatibility between the original Game Boy and the newer models, like the Pocket and even the Game Boy Color. To solve this, Nintendo included a special link cable with the Game Boy printer. It had 2 different connectors, so it could work with both the Pocket and the DMG. But what if you didn't care about the camera or the printer, and just wanted to trade Pokémon with your friends? Well, Nintendo was more than happy to sell you separate adapters, or universal cables, in different packages and variations. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do you agree with my picks, or do you see things differently?